So what do somatic experiencing and integral somatic psychology have in common? They have in common the following. They recognize the importance of including the body in therapy. That's what it comes down to. Yeah? The body has been left out of therapy for so many reasons for a long time. And what people are discovering of late, in the last 30 years in particular, is that even if you bring a little bit of attention to the body in therapy, the outcomes are much better. Right? Cognition is better, emotion is better, and behavior is better. Energy is better. The body is better from physical symptoms, and relationships are better. This is what people are discovering. And so somatic experiencing brings the body in a particular way. Essentially, it says that if a person is traumatized and does not recover from the trauma, then their body is compromised. It's dysregulated. It's fixated. Yeah? And so it brings in a way of working with the body that helps the body to become free of the dysregulation and of the fixation. And that helps the person to function better, to get rid of PTSD symptoms, and function better cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally, and so on. That's what somatic experiencing is. And if you're interested in the approach, you don't know about it, a good book to read to begin with is Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma by Dr. Peter Levine. Yeah? Now, what ISP, Integral Somatic Psychology, does is that it recognizes that the body is important for all our experiences. Cognition, in the broadest sense of the word, I'm paying attention to something. That is cognition, in the broadest definition of the word. I perceive you, through the five senses. That's an act of cognition, in the broadest sense of the word. I process it, and then I evaluate it, right? Then I have a response to it, but then I have a memory. I use language to describe it. They're all acts of cognition. Then I have a reaction to it. What is a reaction? Emotion. Emotion is defined these days as the following. The summary assessment of what the situation means for the whole organism, for its well-being, right? And for survival, right? For example, we think of the virus now. Immediately, you think what? I'm getting on the plane. Immediately, there is a prediction in the brain of what? The possibility of what? Loss of well-being, right? How do I come to know that? Because it is simulated in the brain as to what the body will experience, right? Or so what does it mean for survival, And that again, I have a reaction, right? That's what emotion is. It's a quick assessment of what a situation means for my survival and well-being. That's what it is. Then, of course, we differentiate it into different emotions and so on. But ultimately, at the basic level, that's what emotion is, according to the most recent definitions of emotion. Yeah. Then there is behavior, right? Expression, lack of expression, action, lack of action. So psychotherapists, we work with what? Cognition, different aspects of cognition, or what? Emotion or behavior. That's what it is, right? And so why is the body important for all three things? This is where there is a new neuroscience that has emerged in the last 20, 30 years, especially in the last 15 years or so. It's called the neuroscience of embodied cognition, emotion, and behavior. Now, I will give you some references, and I'll send you to my website to read articles on this subject, yeah? But what it essentially says is the following. My brain and body, my brain is situated in my body, right? And my body is situated in the environment, and you're all part of it, right? But also the moon and the sun and everything else and the virus and so on, right? So you have this. You have this. The science of neuroscience of embodied cognition and emotion says, emotion, it's clear that emotion is a function of the body, right? Because what is emotion? And it's assessment of what my body would feel, whether good or bad, whether my well-being will go up or go down, whether my survival is what? Enhanced or what? Threatened. So in order to assess that, I have to involve the whole body. That's clear. So emotion has to be a function of the whole body, right? I might remember something about my body experience from the past and recall it quickly to make that assessment, but eventually I have to use the whole body, right? That's clear. Behavior involves the body. That's very clear. I can't speak or not speak without the body. I cannot do something or what? Not do something without the body. So it's clear that emotion and behavior are dependent what? On the body, right? What about cognition? Because going back to graduate school, I was taught it's a function of the brain, right? It is, of course, a function of the brain. Nobody said that it's not. But what neuroscientists are finding is that it's a function of the body. And it's a function of the environment, right? If you think about it, with a simple example, it's so clear, but people have a hard time with it, right? So they've done a lot of research to establish that, and that's the science of embodied cognition. So if you think of an example, a child's bonding experience with the mother, what it thinks about it, it's a cognition, right? How can it not depend on the body of the child? How can it not depend on the body of the mother in the environment? How can it not depend on whether there's war going on or not in the environment? Right? So, simple example drives home the point. Even cognition has to involve the body and the environment, right? Other people, right? Theoretically, they've done a lot of experiments. For example, when you go to the supermarket, right? You go to Welcome, right? You have two options, right? You can get a basket that you carry like that, or you have a push cart, right? And then some of you go in thinking, I will not need either. I will just take a few items in my hands, right? Correct? 3 conditions. This is one of those experiments they've done in the Netherlands. So they've just done it with hand cart and what? Push cart. So, let's say half of you use the hand basket. Half of you use the push cart, right? Who will buy? Who will decide to buy? It's a choice, right? Choice is a cognition as well as a behavior, right? Which group will end up buying more impulse items? Items not on the list, items they think they should not buy. Which one? All right? The small hand basket or push cart. Why? Because there's more space, right? That's the logic. Makes sense. Except that the people, when the hand cart, end up buying more impulse items that are not good for them. Why is that? The reason is the following. From the time I'm a child, right, when I don't want something, I keep pushing. Right? When I want something, what do? Hold on to it. So these actions are highly correlated with the cognition of what? Not choosing and what? Choosing. So you end up buying more with a hand basket. So avoid the handbasket. And I would think, even though I don't think they've done an experiment, I would think, I've always thought that. Whenever I go to the supermarket, I say, I don't want to buy. And I'm coming in, look at all these people, consumers. I'm going to buy only a few items. I'm going to pick them up by hand. I always end up doing what? And there's a store employee who comes and says, here's a basket, right? I'm sure that if we included that condition, people who hand carry will buy more. Why? Because they even what? Clutching harder. So that's one of the experiments that has been done to show that the body is important. Right? Not only that, for example, I'll give you another example. If I have you lean backward and process an emotion of attraction, like, let's say, you're feeling attracted to somebody, and I want you to process that, right? I have you lean back and process that situation on a video or a thing, or a page. Guess what? The brain doesn't process it well. On the other hand, if I want them to process, they're leaning forward and they're processing what? Something of hate, revulsion, right? The brain doesn't process it well. People don't remember what they read, right? The details of it. That is another example to show that the body is very important, and the emotion is very important in what? Cognition, right? So this establishes that the body, it needs to be available and regulated for optimal cognition, behavior, and emotion, right? Is that clear? Right? But the body does not like unpleasant emotions. Remember Sigmund Freud, who said, we are governed by a principle called the pleasure principle, by which I'm attracted to what? Pleasure. The brain is what? Averse to pain. That is true. Absolutely true. I see it every day. I wake up from a bad dream, I want to check my email rather than process what the bad dream. All right? So we are averse. So how do we push away unpleasant emotions? We're having emotions all the time, by the way. Emotions are there all the time. We're either feeling good or bad. Feeling good or bad is a sensory motor emotion. And because we're not taught that in graduate school, we're only taught a list of 5 emotions or 6 emotions, right? And we say every emotion is a combination of the above, like sadness and happiness. When client comes in and says, I feel bad about the relationship, we say, what do you feel? You see the problem? They're telling us that they're feeling bad. So we always have emotion. We are never without emotion because the brain is constantly predicting, at least at the basic level, where it's good or bad, right? And we don't like that because unpleasant emotions are states of stress and dysregulation in the body, right? You can't feel bad without stressing and dysregulating the body. The brain doesn't like it. So what does it do? It forms psychological defenses. So when I see somebody sad, I see you're sad, they say, absolutely not, I'm not, you are. Psychological defense, right? Or I look around and see everybody is sad, not me, except that everybody sees me as sad, right? Psychological defense, right? Projection. But more important defenses are in the body. I can just do what? Do any number of things with the body to close it down, like tightening it or loosening it too much. Or there are any number of defenses, the details of which you can read about, But I shut my body down. And when I do that, guess what? The emotion is what? Not available. I don't feel it. But what happens to the body? It's not available to the brain or to the environment. Therefore, cognition, emotion, behavior, they all come compromised. Right? But we can also form subtle body defenses. Eastern psychology says that this is not the only body we have. We have another body. It's a quantum level body. So in those days, they didn't know the word quantum. They said subtle. It's so small you can't see it or measure it. Like subatomic particles. That body can also form defenses, what we call energy defenses, right? So for example, in Chinese medicine, when the body is too distressed, meridians get blocked, right? They blocked to prevent you from having an unpleasant experience, but you end up having pain of the defense, right? And Freud would say that's the compromised formation, right? So what we had to do in order to make the body more available to the brain and to the environment is to what? Work with the emotion to create a bigger capacity for it, right? So that it becomes regulated and bearable, so that we can face life with a capacity for a certain level of pain that's inevitable, right? Buddha said that, life is what? Half pain, half pleasure, right? At best. But most of us go through life with what? My spiritual teacher said to me, teacher, most of the time it's pain, 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 and then a little bit of pleasure. And we hope that we can hang on to it, then it's pain. Right? Now we're old enough to know that strategy of holding on to pleasure forever is not, it's a fantasy. Right? So all that we can do is to what? Develop a capacity for the unpleasant experience of life so that we are not stuck in it. See, when we shut the body down to protect ourselves from it, we get stuck in that end of, or the pole of the experience of life. Right? Whereas when we open to it, then we can bounce back and forth. In fact, pleasure becomes what? More enhanced. Because if you're afraid of pain, psychological pain, we shut down, then when you open up, when you have pleasure, we're afraid if you open up too much, we'll get bounced to the other end, right? So what integral somatic psychology does is what? It says, let's look at the difficult emotions in the situation and develop a capacity for it, right? By working with the body defenses and the energy defenses in such a way, the emotion becomes more bearable. And you find that to be the case all the time. You can try it at home. You don't have to wait to take a training. If you have a fear, let's say, like fear is very common now, right? There was a guy in my airport taxi, right? And he was coughing all the time. And I was also wearing a mask, but the windows were closed. I was frozen. I didn't have the cognition to tell him to open the windows, right? Paul told me that later. I said, of course. But when you get scared, what do? Your options become limited. Behavioral options become limited. You're just focused on the threat, right? So next time you have an emotion, remember that the emotion is potentially what? Whole body experience. And if you're limiting it in one area, it's likely to be more unbearable than when you actually have it in other places in your body. Right? An analogy would be, if you have a weight, 50 kilo bag, is it easier to lift it with one arm or both arms? It's the same thing. Emotional load is similar. People are afraid of it. What do you mean? We want to get rid of it. What do you mean to expand it? It's for them to experience that it's possible to have the experience of the same emotion in a more bearable way for a longer period of time, to learn from it, to give the brain more time to process it what? For emotional and behavioral implications, cognitive implications, then everything gets better. So that's the idea we're going to be using in the demonstrations. Those of you who are training in a somatic experiencing will learn how to work better with emotions, right? There's a way to work with emotions in somatic experiences as well, and it's good. It has to, if you bring the body in with emotions, of course, you get better outcomes than somebody who works with emotions without going to the body. But here, we are doing it more focused on that, right? It's focused on actually creating a greater capacity. Now, how much more capacity for for the person? It depends on the person. In the book that I'm writing, there is a chapter on these high drama cases where the emotions are out of the world, so intense, so unbearable, so fully there in different places in the body, so deep. For a long time we had to work with it. And then there's a great outcome change. Then there are other cases I've worked with that look not so interesting, right? At least for the class. Not enough emotion, so little, and so hard to access it. And even the client says it's not much. It's not so unbearable. And the distribution is very limited. And it's only for about a limited amount of time, 1 or 2 minutes. It would seem that such sessions will not lead to outcome changes. But I've written a whole chapter on cases where that has brought about big changes, like asthma and so on. Why is that? Because each one of us has a unique history of how much we can bear, based usually on our parents, right? And our caregivers. And so some of us form these huge symptoms like asthma, migraines, right? Autoimmune disorders, when they're psychological in origin, only when they're psychological in origin, at low levels of suffering. And some of us develop symptoms at high levels of suffering. So it doesn't matter. All that you have to do is to move the goalpost a little bit depending on where the client is. And that's what we're going to do, today. So I will be happy to answer questions later on, but let's get some experience in, right? And then we'll take a short break, come back, answer questions, and I will do another demo. Yeah? Is that okay? So far, so good? Yeah. So let me call on Cheng Wai Hing.
Eliza.
Eliza.